32nd year presentation of the Philip K. Dick Award. 39 of them have been held right here at Norwescon. Philadelphia Science Fiction Society is awesome for sponsoring the award. It's good that NISCAs can actually help sponsor it here, and Norwescon can actually present it. It takes a whole community to do this. I look across the creek here, and like I said, it grows every year. We have more people in the back. Thank you very much. We need cheap seats. Did everyone get enough desserts? Good. We cut back on what we gave last year. We had a whole bunch of variety. We found out that the first 100 people got everything and no one else did. So I'm sorry, we have only no chocolate, chocolate with nuts and chocolate. I was going to introduce our chair, Peggy, but she's passed the information on to me. I am the vice chair of this year, in addition to being the server and coordinator for the Philip K. Dick Award. Norwescon 37 is pleased to have everyone here. This is a crown jewel of an event for Norwescon. It justifies us as a literary event, and at the same time, too, it allows us to showcase bright, upcoming talent that we hope to see a whole lot more of in the future. So, with that, I'm going to introduce Peggy Burrow, the president of the president, isn't it? No?
Yes, president.
President of the Northwest Science Fiction Society.
I appreciate it. As he said, I am the president of the Northwest Science Fiction Society, which is locally called NISFIS. And I am very pleased that we are part of this presentation every year. We are the social branch of Norwescon. And if you want to know more about us, we do have a table across for registration, conveniently located there, so just stop by and see us. But before I step down and let you hear all of these wonderful stories, and they are wonderful stories, by the way. I have read them all. They are all lovely. They are all worthy of being up here. The judging panel did a wonderful job this year and had a very tough selection. So I encourage you, if you have not completed reading these, complete them. They are all wonderful, no matter which one wins. So, without any further ado, let's get on with the important part of the ceremony. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce my friend and also the administrator of the Philip K. Dick Award, Courtney Van Pelt.
I forgot my lines. That's a good reminder that we should turn off our readings. Yes, this is, what did you say, the 32nd
It is.
Presentation of the Philip K. Dick Award. The award originated shortly after Phil Dick died. Tom Dish conceived the idea. It came to him in a dream that there should be an award to honor Phil Dick. And Charles Brown of Locust, and David Hartwell, and Paul Williams, who was Phil Dick's literary executor. I think Albus Buttress put their heads together and felt that the award to honor Phil Dick should go to the best paperback novel published in the science fiction field, because so many of Phil Dick's best novels came and went as paperback originals and didn't get a lot of recognition at the time they were published because they were basically on the shelves and gone in 3 weeks. So the award was established, I guess 1982, specifically to honor the best paperback original science fiction work published in the United States in the previous year. And if you haven't grabbed one, we've got flyers, we've got booklets listing all the past winners. And this year's winner will not be listed in there, but the nominees are. You guys are dying to know, I know. But every one of these works, every one of the works in the final ballot was selected through a difficult process by the 5 judges, and every work deserves to be up there, deserves to be there. And to make sure that you guys get a chance to appreciate them all, we have the authors or someone representing them read a selection from that work, which I think is, I don't think any other award ceremony does this, and I still think it's a great idea. And no, I didn't come up with the idea. And so I think we should just get started with that. The first nominee this year is The Calculated Life by Anne Charnock, published by 47 North, and Anne's here to read from it.
Hello everyone. I'm going to read an extract from halfway through the book. My main character is called Jaina, and she's a super intelligent bioengineer woman who works within the corporate sector. And she lives a very constricted, controlled life, and she reaches a point where she wants to take a few more risks and find out a little bit more about normal life. So her first major act of transgression is to take a forbidden journey outside the city limits of Manchester. So I'm just going to read about the start of that journey. The carriage juggled. They looked out as the shuttle gathered speed, and within half a minute they were flying noiselessly away from the city centre. The buildings blurred. She hunted for a recognisable feature. It made her eyes hurt. So she relaxed and tried to absorb the visual cacophony. And this way she sensed that the built forms were gradually changing in character from large bulks with shiny reflective surfaces to smaller, less dazzling blocks with irregular roof lines, more complexity and more greenery. She grasped she was witnessing the compactness and semi-structured order of the suburbs. Despite the shuttle's speed, it was apparent that security-wise, were on the tracks. At the precise moment this realisation crystallised, the shuttle burst into a landscape so unrestricted that she gasped. An almost unreachable horizon, a high blue sky stretching across the entire landscape. She placed her hand flat against the window, for she wanted to stand out there, alone amid the giant discs of green and yellow that lay squat and unbounded on chocolate brown soils. She wanted to stand out there and feel the size of the planet through her feet. This was the first time she had appreciated, through the kind of revelation only granted she now realised to a witness, that the earth really did curve, but so slightly. She felt less than tiny. She felt like a negative presence, a scratch of an entity on the skin of the planetary body. The circular field's bright colours greyed towards the horizon. These were the irrigated expanses of outer Manchester, at one time a rain-fed region of cereals and livestock. Now crops sprang to attention only at the command of overhead gantries with their flowers of water droplets. Facing forward again, she detected something low and shapeless emerging through the heat haze. Even as they spread closer, she discerned no punctuations, no towers, no spires, no cranes. This had to be the first enclave, she thought. The shuttle slowed towards the station and the new urban landscape became a reality. No clear signs of economic activity, No factories, only 3 warehouses on the sidewalk. Minor distribution depot, she supposed. She caught sight of streetlights but no vehicles and monotonous blocks of low-rise housing units, 4 to 6 stories high, clearly set out on a grid pattern, untidy with clothes hanging from balconies which, as far as she could make out, were largely relegated to household storage. The shuttle pulled into a station. Functionality laid bare. No advertising hoardings, no wrought iron squirrels hinting at former glory days. No romance had ever been connected to this place, she thought. It's not what I expected. She sighed. I guess I didn't translate the data to her. At each shuttle stop, the urban vista remained monochrome, but the intervening countryside transformed into a sea of citrus, a whispered reminder, she thought, of the country's wild and wooded past. She felt her throat tighten, her breathing became shallow. Her imagination had failed her. Already the reality gap was huge. I should peer between the lines of data, interpolate rather than extrapolate. I could have deduced something closer to the truth. I simply wasn't looking for it.
That was Anne Charnock with The Calculated Life. Our next nominee, Ancillary Justice by Leckie from Orbit. Anne couldn't be here tonight, but Ellen Wright, her editor, is. Oh no. Publicist, excuse me.
So obviously I didn't write the book that I'm reading from, but I did choose the reading, which skips around a little bit. I'm going to start with the beginning of chapter 1, and then go to the beginning of chapter 2, which actually takes place before chapter 1. The body lay naked and face down, a deathly gray, spatters of blood staining the snow around it. It was minus 15 degrees Celsius, and a storm had passed just hours before. The snow stretched smooth in the wan sunrise, only a few tracks leading into a nearby ice block building, a tavern, or what passed for a tavern in this town. There was something itchingly familiar about that outthrown arm, the line from shoulder down to hip. But it was hardly possible I knew this person. I didn't know anyone here. This was the icy back end of a cold and isolated planet, as far from Rajai ideas of civilization as it was possible to be. I was only here on this planet, in this town, because I had urgent business of my own. Bodies in the street were none of my concern. Sometimes I don't know why I do the things I do. Even after all this time, it's still a new thing for me not to know, not to have orders to follow from one moment to the next. So I can't explain to you why I stopped, and with one foot lifted the naked shoulder so I could see the person's face. Frozen, bruised, and bloody as she was, I knew her. Her name was Sevardin Vendai, and a long time ago she had been one of my officers. A young lieutenant, eventually promoted to her own command, another ship. I thought her 1,000 years dead, but here she was. She was undeniably here. I crouched down and felt for a pulse, for the faintest stir of breath. Still alive. Sevardin Vendai was no concern of mine anymore, wasn't my responsibility. And she had never been one of my favorite officers. I had obeyed her orders, of course, and she had never abused my ancillaries, never harmed any of my segments as the occasional officer did. I had no reason to think badly of her. On the contrary, her manners were those of an educated, well-bred person of good family. Not toward me, of course, I wasn't a person. I was a piece of equipment, a part of the ship, but I never particularly cared for her. Now we're going into chapter 2. 19 years, 3 months, and 1 week before I found Sevardin in the snow, I was a troop carrier orbiting the planet Shisarna. Troop carriers are the most massive of Rajai ships, 16 decks stacked one on top of the other. Command, administrative, medical, hydroponics, engineering, central access, and a deck for each decade, living and working space for my officers, whose every breath, every twitch of every muscle was known to me. Troop carriers rarely move. I sat, as I had sat for most of my 2,000-year existence in one system or another, feeling the bitter chill of vacuum outside my hull, the planet Shisarna like a blue and white glass counter, its orbiting station coming and going around, a steady stream of ships arriving, docking, undocking, departing toward one or the other of the buoy and beacon-surrounded gates. From my vantage, the boundaries of Shiserna's various nations and territories weren't visible, though on its night side the planet cities glowed bright here and there, and webs of roads between them, where they've been restored since the annexation. I felt and heard, though didn't always see, the presence of my companionships, the smaller, faster swords and mercies, and most numerous at that time the justices, troop carriers like me. The oldest of us was nearly 3,000 years old. We had known each other for a long time, and by now we had little to say to each other that had not already been said many times. We were by and large companionably silent, not counting routine communications. As I still had ancillaries, I could be in more than one place at a time. I was also on detached duty in the city of Ors, on the planet of Shiserna, under the command of Decade Lieutenant Anne. Ors sat half on waterlogged land, half in marshy lake, the lakeward side built on slabs atop foundations sunk deep in the marsh mud. Green slime grew in the canals and joints between slabs, along the lower edges of building columns, on anything stationary the water reached, which varied with the season. The constant stink of hydrogen sulfide only cleared occasionally when summer storms made the lakeward half of the city tremble and shudder, and walkways were knee-deep in water blown in from beyond the barrier islands. Occasionally, usually the storms made the smell worse. They turned the air temporarily cooler, but the relief generally lasted no more than a few days. Otherwise, it was always humid and hot. I couldn't see Ors from orbit. It was more village than city, though it had once sat at the mouth of the river, and been the capital of a county that stretched along the coastline. Trade had come up and down the river, and flat-bottomed boats had plied the coastal marsh, bringing people from one town to the next. The river had shifted away over the centuries, and now Ors was half ruins. What had once been miles of rectangular islands within a grid of channels was now a much smaller place, surrounded by and interspersed with broken, half-sunken slabs, sometimes with roofs and pillars, that emerged from the muddy green water in the dry season. It had once been home to millions. Only 6,318 people had lived here when Rajshai forces annexed Shiserna 5 years earlier, and of course the annexation had reduced that number. In Ors less than in some other places, as soon as we had appeared, myself in the form of my Esk cohorts, along with our decade lieutenants, lined up in the streets of the town, armed and armored. The head priest of Icht had approached the most senior officer present, Lieutenant Anne, as I said, and offered immediate surrender. The head priest had told her followers what they needed to do to survive the annexation, and for the most part, these followers did indeed survive. This wasn't as common as one might think. We always made it clear from the beginning that even breathing trouble during an annexation could mean death. And from the instant an annexation began, we made demonstrations of just what that meant widely available. But there was always someone who couldn't resist trying this.
That was from Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie. Our third nominee this year is Solaris Rising 2, the new Solaris book of science fiction, edited by Ian Watts, and published by Solaris. And Ian couldn't be here. Reading from the book will be David Tackett.
Okay, this excerpt begins, first of all, this is the first short story called Tom, and it is by Paul Cornell. And the excerpt opens upon, you know what? The excerpt opens, sorry. It happens on Earth, and an alien tour guide has just been violently swept overboard by a horny aquatic male of her species. I was one of the first, I guess, to have that experience. My working on the Great Barrier Reef made it more likely. The Carviv always asked to visit reefs, and because they always asked to work, a lot of them in the first party ended up as tour guides, things like that. Their hosts tried to dissuade them, but the companies that took them on were delighted. Mate, we've got a guide who is herself a tourist attraction. The Carviv presence funded the Regrowth Initiative and the carbon sinks. It was so unthreatening, you know? They didn't want to see our armed forces, they wanted to be near our water. The females separated, integrated by not staying in groups at all, spreading out all around the Pacific Rim. The males we saw on television lay on the ocean surface somewhere off Hawaii, sleeping most of the time. Aussie blokes identified with that. That was a good first year with the whole planet kind of sighing in relief. We'd met aliens and they turned out to be quite like us, really. None of the predictions of outrage and uprising coming true. After a little while, nobody had that much of a problem. Humanity looked at itself in comparison with these guys and decided we weren't that bad or that good and stopped worrying so much about the end of the world. There was, after all, another one just over there, 70 light years away, and those guys didn't seem to think we were so bad. So, looking back, I guess we started tidying the place up, now that the neighbors had come visiting. So much ecological repair in such a short time. The Carvive refused, even when asked to express any negative opinions about the world they were visiting. But I think their love for the water contributed to us turning a corner ecologically. And the years after have continued to be good. But I still occasionally feel, well, just, sometimes I don't know how I feel, until I look at Tom. Everyone turned out to welcome Swav when she arrived at the platform. She traveled on one of their boats, those slim white shells, their hulls shaped reassuringly like our own yachts, but with some sort of power source that made no sound, the sail only for breathing, billowing out to do as it approached us. "Hi everyone," she said as she stepped off the ladder onto the platform. Her accent had already started sounding Aussie. "Thanks for having me." She was sparkling white, a round head like a bowling pin, a diagonal sash that was decorated with dense designs as her only clothing, slim shoulders, big three-fingered hands like a cartoon character. She swept downward to a tiny pair of feet, her whole body leaning to one side or the other with every step. There were no visible, well, it's weird to use a word like genitalia, thinking back to that moment, but that's how biologists, how Annie actually would have been looking at her. Her chest was just rounded, as if she was a clothed human, but it was her face that was the most extraordinary thing. Enormous blue eyes, utterly like ours, but impossibly expressive. The ridges above them which danced like extraordinary eyebrows. The button nose with a single nostril. The wry squiggle of a mouth, never open enough so you could see teeth, but always in motion, saying so much even when she wasn't. She had a waterproof rucksack on her back that looked like she'd just bought it. The others clustered around her, Helena the boss, doing the air kissing, which we've been told delighted the Carvive. And it seemed indeed to do the business with Swap. That was when I heard that huge, honest laugh for the first time. I was holding back for some reason, Annie, her arms folded beside me. Swap glanced over and looked at me, and held my gaze. Her laugh suddenly turning into what looked like quite a shy smile. I found myself smiling back.
That was Solaris Rising to the new Solaris book of science fiction, headed by Ian Waits. Our next nominee is The Mad Scientist's Daughter by Cassandra Rose Clarke from Angry Robot. Cassandra.
All right, I'm just going to read from the beginning, so I don't have to catch you guys up on anything. Many years later, Kat still remembered the damp twilight on her skin and the way the dewy grass prickled and snapped beneath her bare feet as she ran up to the edge of the forest that surrounded her childhood home. Her mother had let her stay out late that night so she could catch fireflies in a jar, and she lay amongst the tumbling honeysuckle and ropes of wild grapevines with the jar held aloft, holding still and waiting for the fireflies to buzz through the opening so she could trap them inside. As the night fell, soft and sparkling all around her, Kat watched the fireflies climb up the sides of the glass, the glow of their abdomens transforming them into intermittent stars. Somewhere around the front of the house, the car door slammed, once and then twice, but she ignored it, knowing her father to come home late most evenings from his meetings in the city. Then the light came on in the screened-in back porch. Immediately, Kat slunk down into the shadows. She was at an age where she liked to spy, where she liked to note the goings-on of adults, undetected. The round, familiar silhouette of her father stepped onto the porch, followed by another figure, tall and thin and angular, a figure Kat didn't recognize. She clutched the fireflies to her chest and crept around the perimeter of the yard to get a closer look. Those fireflies she had caught blinked on and off in the darkness, and Kat's jar glimmered faintly from between her hands. On the porch, behind the gauzy screen, the unfamiliar silhouette sat down. Her father leaned over it, their shadows blurring together. Kat slid across the grass. She crept up to the porch near the steps, to the place where the screen had been ripped away from the frame a few weeks ago
by the old raccoon that came around the yard sometimes. She tucked her jar under her arm and stood on her tiptoes and peered through the screen's gap, and she saw her father's broad, expansive back, a narrow sweat stain tracing along his spine. Of the stranger, she saw nothing but a pale, slender arm hanging motionless off the side of the plastic chair and a foot covered in a dirty old sneaker. Her father straightened up and took a step back. He put his hands on his hips. He said something, too soft for Kat to discern, with the sounds of cicadas whining in the trees and a ceiling fan clicking rhythmically inches from her father's head. He sighed. Then he walked across the porch to the wicker table in the corner and set down a thin metal tool that gleamed in the porch's yellow light. There was a person sitting in the plastic chair, only he didn't seem like a person at all. His eyes focused on Kat, and she yelped and ducked into the crawl space beneath the stairs. "Do we have a visitor?" said Kat's father, his voice booming out into the night. Kat huddled in the cool, moist dirt beneath the house, her jar pressed between her chest and her knees. It smelled of cut grass and old rainwater. The screen door slammed. Footsteps rattled Kat's hiding place. Then her father's face appeared, white and round as the moon. "What have you got there, kitty cat?" He pointed at her jar of fireflies. "It's my light jar." "I see," said her father. "And a lovely light jar it is." He reached under the stairs and plucked her out, swinging her through the cool night air and bringing her to rest on his hip. "I have someone I want you to meet." Kat buried her face in his soft shoulder. He carried her into the screened-in porch. The light inside was weak and old-looking and buzzed like the cicadas outside. The man sitting in the plastic chair looked at Kat's father, then at Kat. His eyes moved before his head did. They were very dark, like two holes set into his face. "Kat, this is Finn. He's come to stay with us." Kat didn't say anything, just pulled the firefly jar to her chest and wiggled out of her father's grasp, though she slid down the side of his leg. Finn nodded and then smiled at her. "A child," he said. Kat wanted to run back out into the darkness. "Yes, Finn," said Kat's father. "That's right. My child. My daughter." His enormous hand ruffled Kat's hair. He knelt down beside her and she looked at him. "Why don't you show Finn your light jar?" Kat didn't want to show Finn anything. He unnerved her. In certain ways, Finn resembled the few adults Kat had seen in her short life. His height, of course, his long torso and limbs, the solidity of the features of his face. But otherwise, he was completely different from the boisterous scientists who came over some evenings for dinner parties. His eyes bloomed steadily in the buzzing light of the porch. His skin was much too fair, sallow beneath the swath of black hair that flocked across his forehead. She decided that he must be a ghost. He was an adult who died. Her father brought him here to study. This was the only logical explanation. Thank you.
That was from The Mad Scientist's Daughter by Cassandra Rose Clarke. Our fifth nominee this year for the Phil Dick Award is Life on the Preservation by Jack Skillingstead, published by Solaris, and Jack is here to read.
Thank you. This is a bit from early on in the book, and I don't think I'm going to even attempt to explain the context. The Noble Quartz. To become himself, Travis Duncan had to leave himself. At age 23, he started by leaving his name, then his family, who after all had already left him, his mother weeping and his father stone-faced in the cyclone wind of Travis's coming out, politically and sexually, and finally Chihuahua, Washington. He shed Travis Duncan like a dun-colored humpback carapace he had been forced to wear his whole life, a name that defined him in the schoolyard pecking order and the expectations of small-town gossips. His new name was Charles Noble, who had been a minor character in a minor French novel. A Spokane County Superior Court judge signed the necessary document, the clerk stamped the paperwork, and Charles Noble was reborn in the real world. But Travis was not reborn out of his isolation. 12 years later, modestly prosperous but alone, Charles remained a minor character in his own life, the carapace invisible but intact, shielding his truest identity from the world, and most especially from one Curtis Sarmier, proprietor of the bookshop next door. At 10:30 in the morning of October 5th, 2012, on the shabby by street of Seattle's Pioneer Square neighborhood, in the small apartment in the back of the art gallery he owned, Charles removed his clothes and hanged himself. That wasn't the first time, but it was the first time the act proved fatal. Charles Noble's corpse swayed forward on its knees, the noose buried in its fleshy neck, the rope stretched taut behind it, knotted to a 3-foot bar of doweling in the open closet. The corpse's tongue, swollen and purple, protruded like a fig from its pale lips. Later, the corpse opened its eyes and sat back on folded legs, making the rope go slack between the noose and the closet doweling. The noose glowed briefly, blackened, unraveled in wisps of smoke, became a ring of ashes and flaked away. Noble's strangled airway swelled open, drawing air into collapsed lungs. The body heaved, chest expanding, tendons cracking, then fell heavily forward, a fading red circlet around its neck. Neurons sparked through the brain, chemical transmitters reactivated, and dead matter became enlivened. The heart muscle labored, then discovered its accustomed rhythm. Arterial circulation resumed. Livid bruises caused by pooled blood faded, were gone. What had been Charles Noble stood up and got dressed.
That was Jack Skillingstead with his book, Life on the Preservation. Our sixth nomination tonight, Countdown City by Ben H. Winters, published by Quirk Books. Ben.
I'm going to give you a little context. This is the second book in a trilogy, and the premise of the trilogy, which started with a book called The Last Policeman, is that the world is going to end there's an asteroid headed toward the planet of the size of the one that killed the dinosaurs. So basically there's a countdown clock on toward the end of to the end of the world. And my hero is a young police detective who, despite this fact, is solving crimes. In this book, he's agreed to look for the missing husband of an old friend of his. And in this scene in chapter 2, he's sitting with some of his buddies, also detectives, at the local diner. And one of them is telling a story. Telling you, Jack. So this lady's at the doctor. She's got this strange pain. The doctor does all the tests and says, "I'm sorry, but you got cancer." Detective McGully is gesticulating like a vaudeville comedian, his bald head flushed with red, his throaty voice rumbling with anticipatory laughter. And the thing is, there's nothing they can do about it. Nothing. No radiation, no chemo. They don't have the pills, and the drip machines don't work right on the generators. It's a mess. The doctor says, "Listen, lady, I'm sorry, but you got 6 months to live." Culverson rolls his eyes. McGully goes in for the punchline. And the lady looks at him and says, 6 months? Terrific! That's 3 months longer than everybody else! McGully does a big freeze-frame comedy face on his punchline, waves his hands, waka waka. I smile politely. Culverson scrapes honey into his tea from along the rim of the jar. Screw you both. McGully dismisses us with a wave of his thick hands. That's funny. Detective Culverson grunts and sips his tea, and I go back to my notebook, which is flipped open on the table beside our pile of unread menus. Ruth Ann, the waitress here at the Somerset Diner, has kept her menus meticulously updated, editing them week by week, scrawling in changes, crossing out now unavailable items with a thick black marker. McGully, still chortling at his own joke, takes out 2 cigars and rolls one across the table to Culverson, who lights them both and hands one back. My friends, chomping on their cigars in virtual unison, middle-aged bald white man, middle-aged paunchy black man, peas in a pod, at their ease in a diner booth, men in the lap of forced retirement, enjoying their leisure like octogenarians. What I'm doing is reviewing my notes from the morning, remembering Martha chewing on her fingernails, staring into the corners of the room. That's a true story, by the way, says McGully. Not the bit where she says about the 6 months. But Beth has got a friend, just diagnosed, 40 years old, not a goddamn thing they can do for her. True story. How is Beth? She's fine, says McGully. She's knitting sweaters. I tell her it's summer, and she says it's going to be cold. I tell her what? You mean when the sun is swallowed by ash? Macaulay says this like it's supposed to be another joke, but nobody laughs, not even him. Let's see, skip down just a little bit. Let me ask you guys a question, I say, flipping forward in my notebook, as I just flip forward in my book. Let me ask you guys a question. How many miles would you say it is from here to Suncook? Culberson tilts his head. I don't know, 6? Nah, says Macaulay, 8 and change. He blows out a thick cluster of smoke, which I fan away with the flat of my hand. The ceiling fan used to carry away most of the smoke, but now the fan is stilled, and the thick gray cloud hangs low over the booth. Why? Says Culberson. Man I'm looking for. He was supposed to bike down to Suncook and pick up some chairs. On a bike? With a trailer? What man are you looking for? Says Macaulay. A missing person. Bike them back from Suncook? Says Culberson. What is he, a bull elephant? Wait, hold on. Macaulay cocks his head at me, his cigar burning in the V of 2 fingers. A missing person? You working on a case, detective? Thank you, Culberson.
That was from Countdown City by Ben Winters. And our 7th nominee this year is Self-Reference Engine by Toh EnJoe, translated by Terry Gallagher, published by Haikasoru. And both EnJoe-san and Terry are here to read and translate, so to speak.
Thank you. And this book consists of 22 short stories, and today I will read the beginning of 9th story, Freud. Okay. And at first I read in Japanese, and then the translator, Terry Gallagher, will read the same part. Freud. 祖母の家を解体してみたところ、床下から大量のフロイトが出てきた。取り返されると思うので、あらかじめ繰り返しておけば、発見されたのはフロイトで、しかも大量に出現した。フロイトという何か他のものでしたなんて言い逃れることはしない。フロイトという性のフロイトであって、なおちぐむのか。こわもてだ。この冬、父方の祖母が亡くなって、ただ広い場所に田舎屋敷が残された。それがこの事件の始まりである。始まってしまっているのを仕方ないとして、終わる見込みは全くない。同居の誘いを断り続けて一人暮らしを続けていた祖母の最後は、なかなかに見事なものかもしれないで、仕込み杖を切って庭へ倒れ込んでいた。庭へ毎日遊びに来る黒猫を切ろうとしたのだと思う。池のどこかにいるのだというかまどを切ろうとしたのだとも言う。まるで剣豪みたいだった最後で。死因は老衰としか言いようがなく、庭の飛び石にけつまずいたのは致命傷となったらしい。さて、取り残された家の方らが、葬儀も終わって親族参集、がん首並べて相談してみて、誰も今更こんな田舎へ戻ろうというものがなく、放っておくにも誰かに気につかれたら厄介で、きちんと扱おうとする管理費がかさる。売り払うにも買い手もつかず、いっそきれいさっぱり解体してしまおうということになって、自撮りを決めて祖母の家に最後に戻ろうと、再び親族が集まる。解体の前にまずは畳を剥がしてと、そこで床下から復元したのが大量のフロイトである。1体2体という数ではなく、畳をめくって床板を引き剥がすたびにフロイトは登場し続けて、結局は22畳の広場の床下全体にフロイトが横たわっていることが判明した。その数ちょうど22体。起きて半畳、寝て1畳、まあ適当なところかもわからない。いい加減と強胆で鳴らす我が家系の面々に、その光景にさすがに絶句して沈黙した。床に並んだ22体のフロイトの列、それが祖母のこの世へのお土産ということになる。
Thank you very much. Some of you may not have gotten that. I'm here to help. As EnJoe indicated, this is the 9th of 22 stories in the book. I'm going to give away a secret. the number 22 will appear in the excerpt you're going to hear. It's not a coincidence. Freud's. When I went to demolish my grandmother's house, a whole bunch of Freuds came up from under the floorboards. The question will probably come up again, so at the risk of repeating myself, it was Freud who emerged, and in great numbers. I am not trying to be evasive or pretend it was something else named Freud. It was Freud, Sigmund Freud, the one with the frightening face. This past winter, my grandmother on my father's side passed away, leaving behind a big old house in the country. That's how this whole thing got started. And once it was started, there was nothing that could be done about it, and there is still no end in sight. In her final years, my grandmother declined all invitations to live with any of her family, and she was doing pretty well on her own, but one day her sword cane failed her, and she collapsed in the garden. It is believed she meant to attack the black cat that came to the garden every day, or it may be she meant to spear one of the catfish that swam in the pond. She was in the prime of her life, like a master swordsman, and this is how she passed her final days. The cause of death was given simply as old age. It seems she may have stumbled over one of the paving stones in the garden, and that's what did her in. So, about the house she left behind. The family gathered for the funeral and put their heads together, but no one was interested in moving back out to the countryside. Letting it stand and having someone live in it would be a pain, and taking proper care of it would be costly. The family could try to sell it, but who would buy it? And so the decision was made to raze it to the ground. A date was set, and the family honored the last day of grandmother's house by gathering there once again on that day. Before the demolition began, the tatami mats were removed, and that is when the whole bunch of Freuds were discovered. Not one Freud or two Freuds, they just kept coming in with each tatami mat that was removed. There were 22 Freuds in all, one lying beneath each of the tatami mats in the big living room. Exactly 22. As the old saying goes, a person takes up half a mat when sitting up and one full mat when lying down. Life can be lived virtuously, simply. The faces of our family tree, which ordinarily radiated both carelessness and courage, were struck dumb at the sight. 22 Freuds lined up in the garden, Grandma's parting gift to this world.
Could we have actually a round of applause for all 7 of the nominees? I hope you'll agree that this was a very good year for paperback original science fiction published in the U.S. I say that, I phrase that jokingly, but I mean it seriously. And I can tell you from having witnessed the process that the 5 judges this year worked very hard to come up with the final ballot and the winners, and begged more than once to be allowed to include more than 7 works on the ballot. So the 7 works that are on the ballot are the ones that they really felt strongly should be here. And I think you'll agree that it's an exceptional year. And rather than drag it out any longer and keep the poor nominees in suspense, I will announce that the special citation this year goes to Self-Reference Engine.
Thank you very much.
I am not expecting, and as you know, I can speak English very well, but I have a paper. Okay, and thank you. today is thanks to great deal of assistance and the goodwill of great community. Some of you may find my English difficult to understand, but I will be happy to show you this piece of paper. The first time I thought about coming here to Norwescon was back in 2010, when the book Harmony by my friend Project was nominated for this award. I was unable to attend in person that year, but I watched on the internet via Ustream. It makes me very happy to be here myself with you. In the meantime, if I had not traveled to San Francisco, and if I had not uploaded to Twitter photos I took of Japan Town there, I would never have encountered the people of Haikasoru, and I would never have met Terry Gallagher, who translated this book. I have to say, it's Terry who wrote this translation, and I cannot understand what is written here. Right here, what it says is, Terry is an amazing human being. Thank you very much. Anything else, I also wish to thank all of you who have read my book. There is a lot of very interesting science fiction in Japanese that has not yet been translated. Most of it is much more difficult than my own book. Harder to read, mathematically more contrived, with even less narrative thread, and even more superb. I'm kidding. I'm very grateful for everything. Thank you very much.
In my haste to relieve the tension for the nominees, I forgot to mention that the Phil Dick Award does not give out a trophy every year. Instead, we give out money. The winners receive a check. I'm not actually sure the exact amount this year, but it's yes, greater than zero.
Don't lose the envelope.
Yes. And now, with no more, well, maybe I'll drag it out a little. No. This year's Philip K. Dick Award goes to Countdown City by Ben Winters.
I am truly honored. As you can tell from having heard from all of those books, you can gather how honored I feel to be selected from this group to be the winner. It means an enormous amount to me. And I thank you guys very much. It's been such a pleasure today to get to spend some time with all of you, in particular with my fellow nominees, and to get a sense of the breadth and depth of the talent that I'm writing alongside of. These books, this series, started off and remains a mystery series, and in contemplating the kind of mystery I wanted to write, I arrived in the science fiction universe, and I'm so happy to have done that. I feel like I've come into this whole world that it's so delightful and so interesting and so intriguing, and as Philip K. Dick knew, and as we all know, offers so many things to say about the world in which we actually live in. And that's why I love it. And I think that's why you all love it too. And it remains to say thank you to my publisher, Quirk Books. No one's here tonight, unfortunately, but I know they're going to watch this on some sort of recorded thing. So Jason and Nicole and Eric and David and Brett and everybody, thank you for all of your support in making this series happen. And thanks again for the award. I really, really appreciate it. Good night. Thanks.
we want to thank all the people who participated in making the awards ceremony tonight possible, including our entertainment, David Bigelow on the piano. All those judges with all the deliberations and the hair pulling out and everything going on.
Burning up the internet.
All the books that were actually given to the judges for consideration, because without those books, we wouldn't know about you guys. I'm serious. So if you, as a fan, you can't really vote on it, but you can actually send things to the administrators if there's a book that's published and qualifies for consideration in the future. We really appreciate all the nominees that have attended. 5 of you tonight. Awesome. Thank you very much for being here. We have this room until about 8:30. We have all the book covers up here. Photo opportunity, everyone. We'll have, hopefully, pictures going out to Locust Awards and other places so that you'll be able to see it. Anything else, sir?
No. Come back next year to find out who won.
Because thank you very much. No, you don't. It's not that easy.
Hello? What's that? I haven't seen her. Okay. Bye.
You have to sign your book cover.